In a small sewing workshop, tucked away in Manhattan's Lower East Side, surrounded by faded fabric piles, sewing machines that groaned like ancient ghosts, Eleanor Whit held in her trembling hand a paper pattern yellowed with age. At 78, her finger, toughened by decades of needles and thread, knew every curve, every marking of that design she had guarded for over 50 years. But on that cold December morning, as the first snowflakes began to dance outside the foggy windows of her tiny world, Eleanor knew the time had finally come to reveal the secret that could shake one of the largest business empires in the United States. Before we dive into this story, tell us in the comments, where are you watching now? Let's begin. Across the city, high above in the Blackstone Tower, Victoria Blackstone stared out over Manhattan through the bulletproof windows of her office. At 35, she ran a $2.8 billion textile empire inherited from her father after his mysterious death 2 years earlier. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and charcoal gray Armani suit reflected the calculated cold with which she ran her company. But behind the mask of success, Victoria carried a hollow ache that no amount of money could ever fill. That same morning, an aged envelope arrived at Victoria's office, delivered by a courier who vanished before anyone could ask questions. Inside it, there was only a handwritten address, Eleanor Whitman, 127 Orchard Street, and a brief note that made Victoria's heart race. She has what your father searched for his entire life, the pattern that changes everything. Victoria couldn't focus on anything for the rest of the day. That name, Eleanor Whitman, echoed in her mind like a whisper from the past. She vaguely remembered hearing her father mention during tense phone calls, always followed by long silences and distant stares. Charles Blackstone had been a man obsessed with perfection, with control, with owning anything he deemed valuable, but there had always been something he couldn't grasp, something that haunted him during his sleepless nights alone in his office. When the clock struck 6, Victoria made a decision that would change her life forever. She dismissed her driver, took her silver Mercedes, and navigated the bustling streets of New York toward the Lower East Side. The contrast was jarring. Midtown's gleaming skyscrapers to the red brick buildings and rusted fires of a neighborhood where generations of immigrants built their lives from scratch. Eleanor's workshop was on the ground floor of a 4-story building that looked like time had forgotten. The faded sign in the window read simply, Whitman Tailoring, since 1952. Victoria paused for a moment before pushing open the glass door, chimed with an old bell. Scent of fabric, machine oil, and lavender filled her senses. Eleanor sat on a wooden chair, working on a navy blue dress with a precision that defied her age. When she looked up and saw Victoria, a bittersweet smile crossed her time-worn face. "I knew you'd come," Eleanor said soft, her voice carrying the weight of decades of untold story. "You have his eyes, the same eyes that searched for answers I couldn't give until now." A chill ran down Victoria's spine. "You knew my father?" Eleanor set her work aside and walked to an old cabinet in the back of the shop. "Charles Blackstone came here for the first time in 1987. He was desperate, searching for something he had lost long ago, something your mother left for you." "My mother died when I was 3. Victoria whispered, feeling the ground shift beneath her. "My father never spoke of her because the truth was too painful for him to bear," Eleanor replied, pulling out a carved wooden box from the cabinet. "Margaret Blackstone wasn't just his wife, Victoria. She was one of the most gifted seamstresses I ever knew, and before she died, she entrusted me with something that could change the destiny of the entire Blackstone family." With trembling hand, Eleanor opened the box and revealed the yellowed pattern she had kept hidden for so long. It wasn't an ordinary sewing template. It was a work of art on paper, with precise markings and delicate handwritten notes. But what struck Victoria the most were the tears streaming down the old's cheeks. "This pattern," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion, "holds the secret your father killed to keep buried. And now, my dear, it's time for you to discover who your mother truly was and what that means for the empire you inherit." Before we dive into this story, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Now, let's begin. Eleanor's words echoed through the small workshop like distant thunder, heavy with a truth Victoria couldn't fully grasp yet. The pattern still rested in the elderly seamstress's hand, fluttering slightly like a leaf in the wind, while Victoria felt the carefully constructed world around her begin to crack. "My mother had to die," Victoria repeated the word slowly, as if trying to decode a foreign language. "What does that even mean?" Eleanor walked over to a small wooden table in the corner of the shop, where an old kettle sat atop an electric heater. Her movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if she were preparing for a confession long kept in silence. "Sit down. This story is long and painful, but you need to hear every part of it." Victoria lowered herself into a wicker chair that creaked softly under her weight. Contrast between this humble space, marble and steel off striking, surrounded by colorful fabric, faint scent of lavender. She felt felt strangely exposed, as if all her corporate armor had suddenly become useless. Your mother, Margaret, arrived in this neighborhood in 1985, Eleanor began, pouring tea into 2 delicate porcelain cups. She was only 22, but her hands carried the wisdom of generations. Seamstress. She came from a modest, rural family, but her talent, there was no logic to it. It was something more. Eleanor sat across from Victoria, cradling her cup like a protective charm. Margaret didn't just sew clothes. She told stories with thread, embroidered dreams into silk, turned scraps into art that moved people to tears. Every piece she made held a soul. And my father, how did they meet? Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles Blackstone was a different man back then, Eleanor said, a bittersweet smile brushing her lips. He'd just inherited a small textile factory from his grandfather and was desperate to grow the business. He heard about a young seamstress in the Lower East Side making one-of-a-kind pieces. Came here looking. Eleanor stood and walked to a shelf filled with old photos. She pulled one out, carefully flipping through it to reveal black and white photographs. Here, she said, pointing to an image of a young woman, dark hair and bright green eyes, working at a sewing machine. That's your mother. Victoria felt the breath leave her lungs. The woman in the photo was striking, but not in a conventional way. There was something in her eye, a depth, an intensity that seemed to reach through the paper. And most startling of all, Victoria could see herself in that, in the curve of the smile, the fall of the hair, the sharpness of the gaze. She's exactly how I imagined, Victoria murmured, touching the photo gently. Charles fell head over heels the moment he saw her, Eleanor continued. But Margaret was cautious. She'd grown up in a world where rich men saw women like her as a passing amusement. It took months for her to trust. Eleanor turned the album's page to reveal more pictures. Charles and Margaret laughed, working together in the shop, him watching her with a devotion that nearly leapt from the photo. They got married in 1986, right here in this neighborhood. It was a simple ceremony. There was real love. So what happened? Victoria, even though a part of her was afraid to know. Charles's business exploded after marrying Margaret, Eleanor explained. Her voice darkened. Her designs were groundbreaking, and he used them as the foundation for his mass-produced collection. Within 2 years, the small factory became a corporate empire. Eleanor closed the album and held it to her chest. But success changed Charles. He began moving in different circles, partnering with people who saw Margaret as a liability. A working-class seamstress didn't fit the image of the tycoon he was trying to become. He asked her to stop work. Victoria, anger rising in her chest. Work, Eleanor replied, eyes welling up. He started stealing her design, took the patterns she made here and replicated them in his factories without her knowing. When she found out, it broke her. Eleanor walked back to the cabinet and pulled out the same box containing the special pattern. But Margaret was smarter than Charles realized. She began working on a secret design, not just a revolutionary pattern, but a blueprint filled with proof of everything he'd stolen. Proof? Victoria leaned forward, her business mind kicking into gear. Codes, dates, references to conversations she recorded in secret, Eleanor said, unfolding the pattern again. Margaret found out Charles was planning to divorce her as soon as you were born. He wanted full custody and to erase her from the picture. Victoria felt sick. He planned this from the beginning? Not at first, Eleanor said gently. I believe he truly loved, but his ambitions swallowed him whole. When Margaret discovered what he was planning, she created this pattern as an insurance policy. If anything happened to her, you'd have enough to expose everything. Eleanor carefully spread the pattern on the table. Under the soft yellow glow of the lamp, Victoria saw that it wasn't just a sewing template. There were tiny handwritten notes in the margin, sequences that looked like dates, and symbols that clearly represented some kind of code. Why didn't she use this while she was alive? Victoria asked. Because she found out she was sick, Eleanor said. Voice cracked. Pancreatic cancer, advanced stage. The doctors gave her 6 months. She knew she didn't have time for a legal battle, so she focused on protecting. Eleanor pointed to a section of the pattern where red ink numbers were written. These are offshore bank account numbers, Victoria. Accounts your father opened with money that should have been shared with Margaret. There's also evidence of bribery, tax evasion, and fraudulent contracts that built the Blackstone empire. Victoria stood abruptly and walked to the window. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the streets in a white blanket that looked like it could cleanse the city. But inside her chest, there was only dark. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Victoria asked without turning around. Why wait until now? Because I promised Margaret I'd only tell you when you were ready to hear it, Eleanor replied. And because I had to be sure that you weren't like Victoria turned, tears streaming down her face. Now, what do I do with all this? Eleanor stepped closer and gently placed a hand on her arm. That, my dear, is a choice only you can can make. You can use this to destroy the empire your father built on lies, or you can try to transform it into something that honors your mother's memory. But if I reveal this, I'll lose everything. Victoria whispered. Maybe, Eleanor nodded. Or maybe you'll discover that some things are worth more than money. Your mother believed that truth and justice were worth more than any fortune. Victoria looked down at the pattern again, no longer just seeing a design, but a map, a guide toward a new life, maybe a new purpose, one that could change not only her path, but the fate of everyone hurt by her father's empire. Is there anything else I should know? Victoria asked. Eleanor hesitated, then walked to another cabinet and pulled out a small blue velvet box. Your mother left this for you too. Inside was a simple gold ring with a tiny emerald in the center. But what caught Victoria's eye was the inscription inside. For Victoria, may you always choose love over fear. Mom. She slid the ring onto her finger, and in that moment felt a connection to the mother she'd never truly known. It was as if Margaret was there, guiding her through Ellen, preparing her for the choices ahead. What happened the night she died? Victoria asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Eleanor closed her eyes, reliving the painful memory. Charles found out about the pattern. They fought badly. Margaret was too weak to resist, but she managed to calm me and begged me to come take the pattern. By the time I arrived at the hospital, she was unconscious. She died 3 hours later. Do you think he... Victoria couldn't finish the question. I think your father was a desperate man who would do anything to protect his secrets, Eleanor said carefully, but the truth is, we may never know for sure. Victoria felt a resolve rising inside her. Her mother had died protecting, trying to ensure that the truth would one day be known. Now it was up to her to decide what to do with that legacy. Victoria stayed at Eleanor's workshop well into the early hours of the morning, absorbing every word, every detail about Margaret's life, pieces her father had deliberately erased from her memory. The special pattern lay between them on the table, like a bridge connecting past and present, mother and daughter, truth and deception. When she finally stepped out of that modest space, she carried not just devastating revelation, but also a strange sense of wholeness hadn't felt in years. For the next 3 days, Victoria couldn't focus on anything work-related. She cancelled important meetings, delegated critical decisions to her team, and spent hours staring out her office window, trying to process the magnitude of what she had uncovered. The emerald ring from her mother never left her finger, and she often found herself absent-mindedly twisting it whenever she felt lost. Sarah, her assistant, noticed the change right away. Ms. Blackstone, the board is getting concerned about the cancelled meetings. Mr. Harrison has called 3 times today, asking about the quarterly budget approval. Victoria barely registered the words. Her mind was flooded with images of Margaret working in that same work, creating beauty with her own hands, while Charles built an empire on stolen design. The injustice burned in her chest like acid. Sarah, Victoria said suddenly, I need you to cancel all my appointments this week. Tell them I'm dealing with a pressing family matter. But Ms. Blackstone, the meeting with the Japanese investors is tomorrow. They flew in specifically for... Cancel it, Victoria repeated firm. And Sarah, I need you to run a discreet search for me. I want everything you can find on the acquisitions my father made between 1985 and 1990. Contracts, legal filings, archived documents. Everything. Sarah hesitated, clearly confused, but not. Victoria had made her decision. Before doing anything with the information Eleanor had given, she needed to fully understand the scope of her father's crime. That afternoon, Victoria returned to the Lower East Side, but this time, she didn't head straight to the work. Instead, she walked the neighborhood street, watching the life that pulsed through them. Children played on the sidewalk. Elderly men played dominoes in small parks. Women chatted in different languages as they hung laundry. Fire escape. It was a world far removed from her. Here, people knew each other by name, looked out for one another, built communities rooted in something deeper than money or prestige. Victoria wondered if her mother had been happy in this place, if she had found a kind of authenticity here that Charles's world could never offer. When she finally arrived at the shop, she found Eleanor working on a wedding dress, her practiced hands guiding the needle through layers of delicate tulle. The old seamstress looked up and smiled, as if she had been expecting. I knew you'd come back, Eleanor said softly. Your mother could never stay away from this place for long either. She used to say it calmed. Victoria sat in the same wicker chair as the night before. Eleanor, I need to know more about my mother, about what happened in the final months of her life, about everything. Eleanor set the dress aside and stood, walking to the tiny kitchen at the back of the shop. Let me make some tea. This is going to be a long talk. While she waited, Victoria examined the space around her with new eyes. The walls were covered in photos. Happy clients in Eleanor's creation. Moments of celebration frozen in black and white and faded color. But one photo in particular caught her attention. Margaret and Eleanor working side by side, both young, both smiling, surrounded by bright fabrics. That was taken in 1987, Eleanor said, returning with 2 steaming cups. The happiest year of your mother's life. She was pregnant with Charles, was still treating her like a queen, and she was creating the most beautiful pieces of her career. What changed? Victoria asked, though she already suspected the answer. Success changed everything, Eleanor said, lowering herself into her chair. Margaret's work started attracting the attention of top designers, fashion magazine, influential people. Charles realized he had a gold mine at home, but he also realized Margaret would never agree to commercialize her art the way he wanted. Eleanor pulled a worn leather folder from a nearby drawer. Margaret documented everything Victoria, every conversation, every time Charles pressured, every moment he took her designs without permission. The folder contained dozens of handwritten pages in the same delicate script Victoria had seen on the pattern. They were like diary, but focused entirely on her interactions with Charles. March 15th, 1988. Charles took my sketches again. When I confronted him, he said they were ours, that marriage made everything communal, but he's never held a needle, never felt fabric breathe between his fingers. How can it be his? April 2nd, 1988. I found out Charles registered 3 of my designs under the company's name without telling. When I asked him why, he said he was protecting our future. But what kind of future is built on lies? Tears stung Victoria's eyes as she read. Her mother had been systematically betrayed by the man who claimed to love her. She never thought of leaving him, Victoria asked. She did, many times, Eleanor admitted. But then you were born. Everything changed. Margaret saw you as a kind of redemption, chance for something beautiful to rise from all that pain. Eleanor flipped a few pages to a specific entry. Read this. December 10th, 1988. Victoria smiled at me for the first time today. A real smile, not just gas like Charles keeps saying. In that moment, I knew I couldn't run. This child needs to know the truth about who she is, where she comes from. She needs to know that there is beauty in the world that can't be bought, sold. She was planning to tell you everything once you were old enough, Eleanor said. But then came the diagnosis. Victoria closed the folder, unable to read more. The ache in her chest was overwhelming. How did she find out she was sick? She started having severe abdominal near the end of 88. Charles dismissed, said it was postpartum, that it would pass. But Margaret knew her body. She saw a doctor in secret. Eleanor stood and looked out the window. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. They gave her 6 months at bed. Margaret was devastated, not for herself, for you. Did my father know? Victoria asked, though she already knew the answer. She told him the night she got the diagnosis, Eleanor said bitter. His reaction, it was telling. Instead of comfort or support or promises to fight alongside her, Charles started making plans for after. Eleanor returned to the table and opened another section of the folder. Margaret recorded some of their conversations near the end. She had a small tape recorder she kept hidden in her purse. She wanted to have evidence. Victoria's stomach twisted. Do you still have those tapes? I do, Eleanor said, but I have to warn you, they're hard to hear. They reveal a side of your father that explains a lot about how he built his empire. I need to hear them, Victoria said, her voice steady. Eleanor hesitated, then walked old cabinet and retrieved small metal box. Inside was an aged tape recorder and several labeled cassettes. This one's from January 15th, 1989, Eleanor said, inserting a tape. 2 weeks before Margaret died. The voice that emerged was soft, but unmistakably young. Victoria instantly recognized green-eyed woman from the photo, now speak, alive in sound. Charles, I need you to promise you'll care for Victoria. Raise her with love. Tell her about me when she's older. Charles's voice was cold, detached. Margaret, you're being dramatic. The doctors could be wrong, and even if they're not, Victoria will have everything she needs, the best education, every opportunity. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if you'll love her, if you'll let her know her roots, where her creativity comes from. Creativity doesn't pay the bill, Margaret. Victoria will be raised a Blackstone, not a neighborhood seamstress. The silence that followed was deaf. Victoria could imagine her mother, frail and ill, realizing the man she'd married saw their daughter only as an ass. Then you don't understand any, Margaret finally whispered. You never did. Eleanor stopped the tape. There's more, but I think you've heard enough for today. Victoria was shaking. Her entire life had been a carefully crafted lie. Her father hadn't just stolen her mother's work. He'd stolen her identity, her roots, her chance to know the woman who had loved her beyond measure. Eleanor, Victoria said through tears. I want to learn. Learn what, dear? I want to learn how to sew. I want to understand what my mother felt, create. I want to connect in the only way I still can. Eleanor smiled through misty eyes. Margaret would be so proud to hear you say that. In that moment, Victoria made a decision that would change not just her life, but the lives of thousands. She wouldn't just expose her father's crime. She would rebuild the Blackstone empire on the values her mother had fought: authenticity, justice, and a deep, abiding love for the art of create. When do we start? Victoria, right now, Eleanor replied, guiding her toward the sewing machine where Margaret had worked decades before. Your mother always said each stitch is a prayer, each seam a story. It's time for you to start writing yours. The weeks that followed became a delicate dance between two worlds that had always seemed incompatible. Victoria split her time between high-stakes corporate meetings at the glass and steel Blackstone Tower and quiet afternoons in Eleanor's cozy work, where she wasn't just learning how to handle needle and thread, she was learning the secret language her mother had once spoken through fabric. Her first sewing attempts were disastrous. Fingers used to typing on sleek keyboard and signing multi-million-dollar contracts trembled as they tried to guide the needle through cloth. Eleanor watched with endless patience, correcting her posture, adjusting the tension, whispering words of encouragement like mantras from a lost era. Your mother struggled in the beginning too, Eleanor would say, whenever Victoria got frustrated over a crooked stitch or uneven seam. But she had something you can't teach: passion. And you, my dear, inherited that from her. During those afternoons, Eleanor shared treasured memories of Margaret, how she used to hum as she worked, always sad tunes that spoke of longing and hope, how her eyes lit up when she discovered a new technique or managed to bring a vision to life, how she wept with joy when a client looked in the mirror and saw herself truly for the first time. But Victoria's corporate world didn't slow down for her journey of self-discovery. James Harris, the company's longtime VP and Charles's most trusted ally, began to ask difficult questions about the cancelled meeting and what he called her lack of focus. Victoria, we need to talk, Harrison said one Thursday morning, entering her office without knocking. At 58, he was an imposing figure, silver hair perfectly groomed, a tailored suit worth more than many people's yearly salary. The shareholders are concerned about your recent absence. Victoria looked up from the reports she was pretending to read, her mind still on yesterday's embroidery lesson. Absent? I'm here every day. Physically, yet mentally. He sat down uninvited, crossing his legs with the entitlement of someone who felt above reproach. You've cancelled 3 major meetings this week. The Meridian Industries contract has been sitting on your desk for 2 weeks, waiting on your approval. And yesterday, during the video call with our European partner, you seemed distracted. Irritation surged in Victoria's chest. Harrison had always been loyal to her father, but she was beginning to suspect that loyalty came with personal ambition. James, I appreciate your concern, but it's not concern, Victoria. It's fiduciary responsibility. He cut in, his voice hardened. Your father built this empire with sweat and blood. He trusted me to make sure you were ready to lead. And what I'm seeing is a woman who's losing sight of what really matters. The words hit like a slap. Victoria felt her mother's emerald ring heat against her finger, a silent reminder of truth Harrison couldn't begin to comprehend. And what exactly do you think matters, James? Profit, growth, expansion, the values your father stood, Harrison said without hesitation. I don't know what kind of distraction you've been entertaining lately, but it needs to stop. We have a company to run. Victoria stood slowly, walking to the window with its sweeping view of man. Down below, she could almost see the streets of the Lower East Side, where Eleanor was probably working on some delicate piece, her calloused hands creating beauty out of nothing. James, Victoria said, still looking out. Did you know my mother? The question caught him off guard. Your mother? Margaret. I mean, I met her a few times. Sure. Why? What was she like? She asked, turning to face. He shifted in his seat. She was a beautiful woman. Quiet. Your father didn't speak about her much after she passed. Quiet, Victoria repeated, as if the word had a bitter taste. Funny how people describe women who've been silenced as quiet. Victoria, I'm not sure what this is about, Harrison said, his patience fraying. But we don't have time for nostalgia. I need your decision on the Meridian contract by tomorrow. Victoria returned to her desk and picked up the fold. She had read it multiple times over the last few weeks, and something about it had always bothered. Meridian Industries wanted to outsource production to factories in Southeast Asia, where labor costs were shockingly low and environmental regulation nearly non-existent. James, have you ever visited those factories in Thailand? She asked, flipping through the document. Not personally, but our consultants conducted a full audit. Everything's within legal standards, he replied, clearly annoyed by what he saw as a trivial question. Legal doesn't mean ethical, Victoria murmured, recalling Eleanor's stories about the working conditions Margaret had witnessed in the 80s. Ethics don't pay dividends, Victoria, he said coldly. Your father understood that. The word struck her like a punch to the gut. That was exactly the kind of thinking Charles had used to justify stealing Margaret's work. Victoria snapped the folder shut. I'm not signing this contract, she said firmly. Harrison stood abrupt. What? Victoria, that contract represents $40 million in annual revenue. You can't just— I can, and I will, find alternatives that don't involve labor exploitation. Exploitation? He laughed bitterly. You're being naive. This is the real world. Your father wouldn't hesitate to take a pragmatic deal like this. Maybe that's exactly why I should hesitate, she said, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. Harrison stared at her for a long moment, eyes calculate. Fine, but know this, your decision will have consequences. Shareholders won't be pleased. I can't shield you from the fallout. After he left, Victoria felt both terrified and relieved. She had just made her first major decision based on the values she was learning from Eleanor, but she also knew she had just declared war on a system her father had spent decades building. That afternoon, she arrived at the workshop earlier than usual. Eleanor was working on a deep evening gown, her hands dancing over the fabric like waves in the ocean. You look troubled, dear, Eleanor said, not looking up. Victoria dropped into her usual wicker chair. Eleanor, how did my mother deal with pressure? With people who wanted her to be something she wasn't? Eleanor paused, placing the dress in her lap and meeting Victoria's eye. Margaret had a quiet strength. She knew she couldn't control others, but she could always control her choice. Every stitch she made was an act of defiance against those who tried to diminish her. But what about when the consequences were too high? Victoria asked, thinking of Harrison's veiled threat. She used to say that betraying your own soul always costs more than any financial loss, Eleanor said softly. She would rather be poor and real than rich and hollow. Tears welled in Victoria's eye. Eleanor, I think I made a mistake. I made a decision that could cost the company a lot. Tell me, Eleanor said, setting the dress aside. Victoria told her everything. The confrontation with Harrison, the rejected contract, the unspoken threats. Eleanor listened in silence, occasionally adjusting fabric or smoothing a seam, her attention split, yet entirely present. You did the right thing, Eleanor finally said, but you need to be ready for what's coming. Men like Harrison don't walk away quiet and their power is threatened. What do you mean? Victoria asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. Eleanor stood and walked to the cabinet where she kept Margaret's doc. There's something I haven't shown you. Something from your mother's final day. She pulled out a thinner folder than the other. Margaret discovered that Charles and Harrison were planning something for after she died, not just about the company, about custody. Victoria's blood ran cold. My custody? Charles wanted to remarry quick. The woman was someone Harrison had picked. She came from a politically connected family. But Margaret stood in the way. Eleanor opened the folder to reveal prenuptial contracts dated months before Margaret's death. They were planning it all in advance. Victoria shot to her feet and walked to the window. Outside, life moved on, as if nothing had changed. But inside the workshop, her reality was once again being rewritten. Eleanor, she asked, her voice trembling. Do you think Harrison knows about the pattern? About the evidence my mother left? Eleanor hesitated. I'm not sure, but I do know he's been asking questions about me. A neighbor said a man in a suit has been around asking about the shop and my connection to Margaret. A chill ran down Victoria's spine. If Harrison suspected anything, both she and Eleanor could be in real danger. If you believe that the courage to face the truth is worth more than any fortune, subscribe to the channel and stay with us on this journey. What do we do now? Victoria asked. Eleanor smiled. There was steel in her tired eye. Now, my dear, you learn to sew the way your mother did, with purpose, because every stitch we make from now on could be the difference between just and silent. Victoria nodded, knowing she had crossed a line she could never uncross. The war for Margaret's legacy had officially begun. The days that followed brought a storm Victoria hadn't seen coming. News of her refusal to sign the Meridian Industries contract spread through the halls of Blackstone Tower like wild, igniting wisps, suspicious glances, and closed-door meeting was deliberately excluded from. James Harrison had made good on his veiled threat, rallying the most influential shareholder against what he called Victoria's reckless emotional decision. On Monday morning, Victoria arrived to find her desk buried under financial reports Harrison had compiled over the week. Each one painted a grim picture, projected revenue loss, competitiveness analyses showing the company falling behind more Ruth competitors, and a detailed list of employees whose jobs were at risk if profit margins weren't maintained. 43 families, Victoria, Harrison said, walking into into her office uninvited, tapping a spread. 43 families relying on the jobs that contract would have secured. Are you prepared to look each of them in the eye and explain why your principles mattered more than their livelihoods? The words hit her like stone. The night before, she had been at Eleanor's workshop, learning how to sew basic stitches on a scrap of plain fabric, her clumsy hands trying to find the rhythm her mother once mastered with ease. But now, faced with the brutal reality of numbers, Victoria started to question whether she had been too naive. James, there are ways to maintain profitability without compromising our values, she tried to argue, though her voice betrayed her hesitation. Values? Harrison scoffed. Victoria, your father built this empire by making tough calls. He understood that in business, idealism is a luxury, and one that a company responsible for thousands of jobs can't afford. He stepped close, placing both hands on the reports. There's something else you should know. I received a call from the board this morning. They're considering a special meeting to discuss your fitness to lead. The blow landed hard. A special meeting? They're within their rights to challenge decisions they deem harmful to the company, Harrison said, cool and calculated. And frankly, Victoria, your recent behavior has raised serious concerns about your leader. Victoria stood and walked to the window. Below, the city pulsed with relentless energy. Millions of people just trying to survive in a world that rarely offered second chance. She thought of Ellen quietly working in her small work, creating beauty with her bare hands, living with dignity despite having so little. And if I don't change my position on the contract, she asked without turning, then you may learn that being CEO is a privilege, not a birth, Harrison replied, even if you are Charles Blackstone's daughter. After Harrison left, Victoria sat alone, staring at the docs scattered across her desk. She picked up the phone and tried to call Eleanor, but the line was busy. She called again. 15 minutes later, still no answer. A chill crept through her spine. Something was wrong. She cancelled her schedule and drove straight to the Lower East Side. When she arrived at the street where Eleanor's workshop stood, she found a small crowd gathered on the sidewalk. Her heart raced when she spotted the ambulance parked out front. What happened? She asked an elderly woman, watching the scene with worry. Senora Eleanor, the woman said, thick with accent. She fainted this morning. Neighbors heard a noise and found her on the floor. Victoria pushed through the gathering crowd and ran toward the ambulance, where paramedics were wheeling a stretcher. Eleanor was conscious but pale, her eyes searching for someone. Eleanor, Victoria called, rushing to her side. The seamstress's eyes lit up when she saw her. My dear, she whispered, voice faint. I was trying to call you. Don't talk, Victoria said, taking her hand. You're going to be okay. No, Eleanor insists, gripping her hand with surprising strength. I have to tell you, they were here. Who? Victoria asked, though she already knew the answer. Men in suits, asking about you, about the pattern, about Margaret. Eleanor whispered urgent. They know, Victoria. They know everything. A paramedic stepped in. Sorry, ma'am. We need to take her now. Victoria followed the ambulance to Mount Sinai Hospital, where Eleanor was admitted for observation. The doctors said it was a mix of high blood pressure and extreme stress, but with rest, she would recover fully. As she waited in the hospital lobby, Victoria got a call from Sarah, her assistant. Ms. Blackstone, I need to warn you. Mr. Harrison has called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning at 9. And there's more. What is it? Victoria asked, bracing herself. Legal just received documents. Someone is challenging the validity of several old company contracts. One signed during your father's tenure. Her stomach dropped. What kind of contracts? I don't have detail, but Mr. Harrison looks rattled. He cancelled his whole day. He's holed up in his office with the lawyer. Victoria ended the call and leaned back in the uncomfortable waiting room chair. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place in a terrifying way. Harrison wasn't just trying to keep her in check. He was trying to find out what she knew about her father's secrets. When she was finally allowed to see Eleanor, the old woman looked more alert but still shaky. Victoria, she said the moment they were alone. You have to take the pattern out of the shop tonight. Eleanor, you need to rest. No, she snapped, more forcefully than Victoria had ever heard. They'll come back, and next time, they won't just be asking questions. She grabbed Victoria's hand, gripping it tight. There's a key hidden behind the picture of the Virgin Mary on the back wall. It opens a small safe beneath the floorboards near the old sewing. Everything's there. The pattern, the tape, the original documents your mother gave. Eleanor, this is too dangerous. Maybe we should take everything to the police. The police? Eleanor let out a bitter laugh. My dear, you still don't understand. Your father had connections everywhere. Harrison too. They know exactly how to make evidence disappear. Victoria felt panic closing in. Then what do we we do? You have to choose. Eleanor said gently. You can go back to your office, sign the contract, protect your position, and pretend none of this ever happened. Or you can honor your mother's memory and fight for the truth, even if it costs you everything. Her words echoed in Victoria's mind like a prophet. She thought of Margaret, silently working in that same work while her husband built an empire on stolen beauty. She thought of the 43 families Harrison had used as leverage. She thought of Eleanor lying in a hospital bed, risking her safety for the truth. If I choose to fight, Victoria asked, voice trembling, will you stand with me? Eleanor smiled, and for the first time since they met, Victoria saw tears of joy in her eye. My dear, I've been waiting for you to ask that question for over 30 years. That night, Victoria returned to the work under the cover of darkness. She found the key exactly where Eleanor had said. Beneath the creaking floorboard, hidden under the old sewing machine, was a small safe. Inside, it was a treasure trove of evidence, enough to not only dismantle her father's empire, but expose the powerful people who had enabled. By the light of a small flash, Victoria examined the documents, and in that moment, she made the decision that would change everything. She wouldn't just fight for the truth, she would rebuild the Blackstone Empire, values Margaret had tried so hard to preserve. If you believe the truth worth more than any fortune, leave a like and continue in this journey of courage. First, he had to survive the board the next morning, and something told her Harrison wasn't just planning to question her leadership, he was planning to destroy it. Victoria packed the documents carefully into a small suitcase and stepped out into the night, knowing that by sunrise, the war for the soul of Blackstone Industries would begin. The morning of the board meeting arrived, cloaked in a dense fog that hung over Manhattan like a warning. Victoria woke before sunrise after a sleepless night spent reviewing every doc Eleanor had safeguarded for decades. The suitcase containing the evidence was now locked in a secure storage vault she had rented in the middle of the night, but she carried copies of the most critical documents with her in a plain fold close to her heart. As she dressed for what could be her final meeting as CEO of Blackstone Industries, Victoria chose every piece with care. Instead of a designer power suit, she wore a simple navy blue blazer she'd bought at a small shop in the Lower East Side the week before, a quiet homage to her mother, a way of bringing Margaret with her into the room where her fate would be decided. The emerald ring on her finger glinted like a talisman, reminding her of the promise she had made that no matter what happened, she would not betray her mother's memory again. When Victoria arrived at Blackstone Tower, she sensed the shift immediately. The air was heavy. Conversations stopped when she packed. No one met her eye. Harrison had done his work. He had rallied support, sewn down, and stacked the room against. The boardroom was full when she entered. 12 men, 2 women, all impeccably dressed, all wearing practiced expressions of neutrality that barely concealed their intention. James Harrison sat at the head of the table, the CEO's traditional seat, a move not lost on anyone in the room. "Good morning, Victoria," said Robert Sterling, the board's chairman, a 65-year-old whose family had invested in Blackstone since its founding. "Thank you for joining us at this special session." Victoria took the only empty seat, noting that it had been deliberately placed to isolate. "Good morning, Robert. I assume this meeting is about my decision to reject the Meridian contract." "Among other concerns," Sterling replied, adjusting his reading glasses. "James has presented some serious doubts about the direction you've taken the company." Harrison leaned forward, his tone polished and patronizing. "Victoria, we all respect the difficulty of your position. We know it hasn't been easy, but recent decisions raise concerns about your suitability for the role." "Suitability?" she repeated slowly, the words settling in her chest like lead. "Could you elaborate, James?" "Certainly," he said, opening a thick fold. "Over the past 3 weeks, you've cancelled 17 major meetings, declined a $40 million contract without board consultation, and have exhibited behavior that is, frankly, eroding investor confidence." Margaret Chen, one of the 2 women on the board, CFO of a global invest, chimed in. "Victoria, we understand the transition after your father's death has been challenged, but this company cannot afford instability at the top." Victoria looked around the table at faces she'd known for years, people who had dined at her home, sent flowers to her father's funeral, and yet now they looked like strangers, bound together by something she was only beginning to understand. "You speak of instability," Victoria said calmly, "but I'd like to speak of integrity." An uncomfortable silence settled. Harrison shifted in his Sterling's eyes flicked toward him, barely, but Victoria caught it. "Integrity is exactly what's in question," Harrison replied. "The integrity of honoring contracts, securing jobs, and preserving the legacy of this company." Victoria opened her folder and slid a document onto the table. "James, since we're talking about integrity, perhaps we should discuss the contracts my father signed with Textile Innovations Corp. in 1987. The shift in the room was immediate. Harrison paled. Several board members fidgeted in their seats. "I don't see how 30-year-old contracts are relevant," Harrison said, though his voice voice had lost its sharp edge. "They're relevant," Victoria said, her tone steady, "because they reveal a systematic theft of intellectual property. They are the foundation on which Blackstone Industries was built." Sterling leaned in, his expression dark. "Victoria, those are serious accusations. I trust you have more than speculation." "I do," she said simply, placing additional documents on the table. "I have proof of fraudulent contracts, recorded conversation, evidence of bribery, and full documentation of how my father built this empire on the stolen work of my mother." The silence was deaf. Victoria could hear the tick of the old clock on the wall, the faint hum of the AC, Harrison's shallow breathing as he processed the magnitude of what she had just revealed. "Your mother?" Board member David Walsh broke the silence. "Victoria, your mother died when you were a child. How would she—" "My mother was Margaret Whit," Victoria said, using her mother's maiden name in public for the first time. "A gifted seamstress, a visionary designer, a woman whose ideas were stolen, mass-produced, passed off as the foundation of this company's success." She rose from her chair and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "You want to talk about leadership? Let's talk about building something real, something honest, something that doesn't come from lies and exploitation." "Victoria," Harrison said, desperation creeping into his voice, "even if these allegations were true, that was decades ago. We can't change the past, but we can protect the future." She turned, her gaze hard and direct. You knew from the beginning. It wasn't a question, it was an indictment." And Harrison's failure to meet her eyes said everything. "I was young," he said. "Your father was persuasive. He said it was for the good of the company. He said Margaret would never understand business." "Then you were complicit," Victoria said softly. "You helped keep a lie alive." Elizabeth Morrison, the other woman on the board, finally spoke. "Assuming everything you say is true, Victoria, what exactly is your proposal? Tear the company down? Risk thousands of jobs?" Victoria returned to the table and looked each member. "My proposal is to rebuild, to establish a compensation fund for artists whose designs were taken, to implement fair trade policies that protect work, to turn Blackstone into a model of ethical leader." "That would cost millions," Sterling said. "Billion," Victoria correct, "and it's worth every cent." Harrison stood abrupt. "You're talking about destroying everything your father. He built it on lies," Victoria replied. "I'd rather run a smaller, honest company than a global founded on theft." Oh, the tension was suffocating. Victoria could feel the calculus happening behind every pair of eyes in the room. Risk versus reward, legacy versus reform. "There's one more thing you should hear," she said, pulling a small tape recorder from her folder. "This is a conversation between my father and Jane, recorded 3 days before my mother's death." She pressed play. Charles Blackstone's voice filled the room, cold, methodical, discussing how to resolve the Margaret issue permanent. When the tape ended, no one moved, no one spoke. Harrison looked as if he had aged a decade. "Now," Victoria said quietly, "do you still want to question whether I'm fit to lead?" Sterling cleared his throat. "Victoria, we'll need time to process. I suggest we reconvene." "No," she said. "You called this meeting to question my leader. I want an answer. Are you with me in rebuilding this company with integrity, or will you continue protecting the crimes of the past?" The room held its breath. Victoria stood alone, knowing this moment could end her career, but also knowing she was finally doing what her mother would have wanted. "If you believe the truth is worth more than any fortune, leave a light. Stay with us on this journey of courage." One by one, the board members began to speak, and to Victoria's surprise, most of them chose to stand with her. The board's vote ended with a result that surprised even Victoria. 9 in favor of her remaining as CEO, 2 against, and 1 abstention. James Harrison was formally removed from all executive function, and an independent investigation was launched into his actions over the past 30 years. But as meaningful as that victory was, it left Victoria with a strange sense of incomplete. In the days that followed, she threw herself into implementing the changes she had promised. She established the Margaret Whitman Fund to compensate artists whose work had been stolen, created new ethical standards for every corporate contract, and initiated a full audit of all international operation. But no matter how busy she kept herself with policy reforms and board, her mind kept drifting back to that small sewing workshop in the Lower East Side. Eleanor had been discharged from the hospital, though doctors had ordered complete rest for at least 2 weeks. Victoria visited her daily, bringing tea, flowers, and updates on the company's progress. During those visits, they talked about Margaret, about Blackstone's future, and about Victoria's plans to honor her mother's memory. Yet, despite the warm conversation, Victoria couldn't ignore the flicker of worry that lingered in Eleanor's eyes. "There's something you're not telling me," Victoria said one afternoon, watching Eleanor fidget with a piece of navy blue fabric she always kept nearby. Eleanor hesitated for a long moment, her fingers tracing invisible patterns across the cloth. "Victoria, there's a part of your your mother's story I've never told, something she made me promise I'd only reveal if you proved you were truly ready to carry the full weight of the truth. Victoria felt a familiar chill run through her spine. After everything that had been uncovered, she had believed she finally knew the whole story. What else could there be? Eleanor rose slowly and walked to an old chest of drawers tucked in the corner of the room. From a hidden compartment Victoria had never noticed, she withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed with age and marked with a wax seal. Victoria recognized immediately. It was the same symbol her mother used to sign her most personal creation. "Your mother wrote this 3 days before she died," Eleanor said, handing over the envelope with trembling hands. "She said it should only be opened when you were ready to learn not just the truth about your father, but the truth about yourself." Victoria took the envelope with reverence, feeling the weight of its unspoken words. The paper was thick, high quality. Inside, she could feel several folded pages. "Why now, Eleanor? Why choose this moment? Because you proved that you're capable of choosing justice over convenience, truth over comfort," Eleanor replied, lowering herself carefully onto the bed. "Your mother knew you'd face a moment when the choice you made would define not just your future, but the future of others. She wanted to make sure you had everything you needed to choose wisely." With trembling fingers, Victoria broke the wax seal. Inside were several pages, written in the delicate handwriting she had come to recognize and cherish. But there was more. Photographs, official documents, and what appeared to be a hand-drawn map. The first page was a letter addressed directly to her. "My dearest Victoria, if you are reading, it means Eleanor has decided you are ready to learn the secret I kept until my final breath. It means you chose the path of truth, even when it was harder than the comfort of silence. There is something about our family, about you that Charles never knew, something that explains not only your natural ability to recognize beauty and authenticity, but also your deep, instinctive gift for leading with your heart. Victoria, you are not just my daughter. You are the heir to a lineage of extraordinary women who dedicated their lives to preserving and creating beauty in a world that often seeks to destroy it." Victoria paused, glancing at Eleanor in confusion. "A lineage? What is she talking about?" Eleanor smiled through tears. "Keep reading, darling. Your mother explains it all." Victoria returned to the letter, now reading with a mix of awe and rising urgency. "My family, the Whit, were not ordinary seamstress. We were guardians of a tradition that stretches back centuries, an ancient art of preserving stories through text. Each generation of Whitman women inherited the responsibility of documenting and protecting the creations of artists who had no voice, no power to defend their own work. The pattern Eleanor kept safe for you is not just proof of your father's crime. It's a map, Victoria. A map that leads to a secret collection of textile masterpieces our family has safeguarded for generations. Priceless works of art created by women whose names were erased from history." The world seemed to tilt. Victoria stared at the accompanying photograph. Women working at ancient loom, embroidering intricate symbols, weaving tapestries that looked like they contained entire universes in their threads. "Eleanor," Victoria whispered, "does this mean—" "It means you are the last of the Whitman line," Eleanor said softly. "Your mother was the appointed guardian of the collection, but when she married Charles and entered his world, had to hide that responsibility. She planned to pass it on to you when you turned 21, but she died before she could." Victoria finished, tears stinging her eye. Eleanor nodded. "Margaret entrusted me not just with the pattern containing evidence, but also with the location of the collection. And now, my dear, it's yours to protect." Victoria kept reading, learning about a hidden network of female artists who had operated for centuries, protecting and preserving work that powerful men had tried to steal or destroy. Her mother had been trained from childhood to recognize what was genuine, to spot forgery, to protect what was real in a world of imitation. "That's why you guys knew," Eleanor said. "Why you sensed something was wrong in your father's business. Why you were drawn to this work. Why sewing felt familiar. It's in your blood, Victoria. It's in your soul." The final page contained detailed instructions finding the hidden collection. Buried deep beneath the Blackstone Tower itself, in sealed-off chambers Charles had closed off decades early, citing structural issues. "Victoria, you now face a choice far greater than reforming a company or exposing your father's crime. You can choose to accept your true inheritance, to become the new guardian of centuries of preserved feminine art, to use your voice, your power, your platform to finally give these creations the recognition they deserve. Or you can choose to live only as the CEO of Blackstone Industries. Comfortable life, but one forever incomplete. The choice is yours, but know that I am already proud of you. You've shown more courage and integrity than I ever did. did, with all my love and hope. Your mother, Margaret Whitman Blackstone. Victoria finished the letter in complete silence. The weight of generations rested on her shoulders. She wasn't just the daughter of a brilliant seamstress. She was the heir to a legacy of protection, preservation, and truth. Eleanor, she whispered, "You knew this all along." "I did," Eleanor said gently, "but Margaret made me promise. Only if you were truly ready. And after everything I've seen, you are." Victoria stood and walked to the window, staring out over the vast city. Somewhere beneath her feet, buried in the foundations of her own company, lay a hidden archive that could rewrite the narrative of feminine creativity. "If I accept this," she said slowly, "if I become the guardian, what does that mean for Blackstone Industries?" "It means," Eleanor replied, "that you have a chance to build something the world has never seen. Company founded not on theft and exploitation, but on preservation and celebration, authentic creation." Victoria closed her eyes. She could feel her mother, her grandmother, generations of Whitman women standing behind. If you believe some legacies are worth more than any fortune, leave a light. Stay with on this journey of discovery. "Eleanor," Victoria said, turning back to face, "when can we see the collection?" The smile that spread across Eleanor's face was like sunrise after the longest night. "Right now, if you'd like," she said soft. "After all, it's time you met your true inheritance." The descent into the basements of the Blackstone Tower felt like a journey through time. Victoria and Eleanor walked down corridors, untouched by light for decades, their flashlights slicing through a darkness so thick it felt almost alive. The air was dense with dust and memories, and every step echoed like a whisper from the past, finally ready to be heard. "Your mother brought me down here only once," Eleanor murmured as they navigated the underground labyrinth, following the detailed map Margaret had drawn. "It was 3 weeks before you were born. She was determined to keep the collection safe, even if it meant hiding it at the very heart of Charles's empire." Victoria held the flashlight in one hand and the map in the other, feeling the irony sink deep. Her father had built his fortune on stolen design, while right beneath his feet, an artistic treasure was hidden that made his empire look small. They arrived at a heavy steel door sealed with multiple locks, untouched for decades. Eleanor pulled an old keyring from her bag, each key labeled with symbols Victoria recognized from the secret code her mother had used in her notes. "Margaret taught me that each key represents a generation of guardians," Eleanor explained as she worked the locks. "This one belonged to your great-grandmother, Catherine Whit. This next one to your great-great-grandmother, Rose. And this," she held up a golden key with reverence, "this was Margaret's." The door groaned open with a metallic echo that filled the empty corridor. What lay beyond left Victoria breathless. The room was far larger than she had imagined, a subterranean chamber the size of an aircraft hangar, with high ceilings and wood-paneled walls. But it was what filled the space that stole her breath. Hundreds of preserved works of art, each cared for with precision and love. There were ancient looms still threaded with unfinished weaving, as if the artists had just stepped out for a break. Monumental taps hung from the wall, telling stories in golden and silver thread shimmered under the soft light of their flashlights. Gowns from centuries past were displayed on mannequins, each a masterpiece of design and craftsmanship that rivaled anything modern fashion had ever produced. "Oh my God," Victoria whispered, walking slowly between the pieces. "How many women contributed to this collection?" "Hundreds. Over 3 centuries," Eleanor said, lighting oil lanterns that had been strategically placed throughout the space. As the light expanded, more treasures emerged. "Each piece here represents a woman whose work was stolen, devalued, or simply ignored by official history." Victoria approached a particularly striking tapestry depicting scenes from the daily lives of working women in the 18th century. The details were so intricate she could see individual facial expressions embroidered into the fabric, each one telling a story of struggle, hope, and dignity. This was made by Maria Santo, Portuguese embroiderer, whose work was claimed by a famous atelier in Lisbon, Eleanor explained, joining Victoria. She spent 5 years on this master, only to have her name erased and replaced with the atelier owners. Victoria felt her eyes sting with tears. "How did you manage to save all?" "Through a secret network of women, passed down through generations," Eleanor said, guiding Victoria deeper into the room. "Seamstresses, embroiderer, weaver, all working together to preserve what powerful men tried to erase. Your mother was the coordinator of that network on the East Coast." They walked past rows of gowns that looked straight out of fairy tale, each one more elaborate than the last. Victoria paused in front of a wedding dress, white silk, embroidered with pearls and silver thread, its pattern catching the light like it was woven from stars. "That was your great-grandmother Catherine's wedding," Eleanor said softly. "She worked on it for 2 years, stitching her love story into every detail. But on her wedding day, she found out her fiancé had sold the design rights to a French fashion house. She called off the wedding Victoria asked, running her fingers lightly over the fabric. No, she married him, but never wore the dress. She said she'd rather keep it as a reminder that true love can't be bought or sold, Eleanor replied. Catherine was one of the founders of this collection. She vowed that no other woman's creation would be stolen without a fight. Victoria continued exploring, discovering sections dedicated to different textile arts. One area was filled with American quilts, each telling stories from the Civil War through encoded patterns. Another showcased Chinese embroidery dating back to the Ming dynasty, saved during the Cultural Revolution by women who risked their lives to protect ancestral art. Eleanor, Victoria said, stopping in front of a glass case filled with paper patterns. These are your mother's original, Eleanor confirmed, unlocking the case with care. Every design Charles stole is along with the true versions he never saw. Margaret always made two versions, one for him and one for the collector. Victoria picked up a pattern with reverence. It was for an evening gown, far more stunning than anything she had ever seen in the Blackstone product line. She knew he was stealing from her. She suspected it within the first months of their marriage, Eleanor replied. But she was smart. Instead of confronting, she began documenting everything and creating superior versions he would never touch. This collection isn't just an arc, it's proof that real creativity will always outshine imitation. Victoria walked to the center of the room, where an old work table stood surrounded by chairs. Sketches, notes, and what looked like a detailed expansion plan were spread across the surface. Was Margaret planning to go public? She asked, reading the documents. She dreamed of a museum, Eleanor said, taking a seat nearby, a place where these stories could be told, where this work could finally be recognized. But she knew it would require substantial resource to make it real. Victoria sat across from her, feeling the weight of generations' unfinished dream. And now I have those resources. You do, Eleanor said simply. You have the power to make your mother's dream a reality. More than that, you have the chance to reshape how the world sees women's contributions to art and culture. Victoria looked around the room and no longer saw relics of the past. She saw a living manifesto of creativity, resist, and dignity. Each piece represented a woman who had refused to be silent, who had preserved her voice through thread and time. Eleanor, she said, her voice thick with emotion, I want to do more than build a museum. I want to transform Blackstone Industries into a platform for contemporary female artists. I want to use our resources to ensure no creative woman is ever exploited the way my mother. Hey, Eleanor smiled, tears slipping down her weathered cheeks. Margaret would be so proud to hear you say that. Victoria stood and walked to a section of the collection that had drawn her eye from the beginning, a space filled with unfinished works, pieces abandoned before their creators could complete. Is there anything I can do for thee? She asked. Eleanor joined, gazing at the half-finished art with a mix of sorrow and hope. Your mother used to say, an unfinished isn't a lost piece. It's a work waiting for the right hands to complete it. Victoria picked up a needle from the table and held it to the light. Then, maybe it's time I learn not just how to sew, but how to finish what other women began. You do that? Eleanor asked, surprised. I would, Victoria said firmly, but not alone. I want you to teach. I want you to help me honor every one of these women the way they deserve. Eleanor took her hand and squeezed it tight. My dear, it would be the honor of my life. In that moment, surrounded by centuries of preserved female creativity, Victoria and Eleanor sealed a pact that went far beyond teacher and student. They became co-guardians of a legacy, finally ready to step into the light. If you believe every work of art deserves to be seen, leave a like and stay with us on this journey of rediscovery. Victoria glanced one last time around the room before they turned to leave. Eleanor, when we return, this won't be a hiding anymore. It'll be the heart of something much bigger. The Margaret Whitman Museum, Eleanor offered with a hopeful smile. No, Victoria replied, her eyes glowing with a new vision. The Institute for the Preservation of Feminine Creativity, a place where the past is honored and the future is protected. Why? As they climbed back to the surface, both women knew they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Victoria's true transformation and the rebirth of Blackstone Industries was only just beginning. 6 months after the discovery of the secret collection, the Blackstone Tower was unrecognized. The upper floors still housed the corporate office, but the first 5 had been transformed into the Margaret Whitman Institute for the Preservation of Feminine Creativity. What had once been cold, impersonal boardroom now pulsed with life, color, and creativity. Every morning, Before heading to her office, Victoria walked the halls of the institute, a routine that had become sacred to her. On that particular June morning, she paused in front of one of the permanent exhibits, a display case featuring the first dress she had completed under Eleanor's guidance. It was a simple piece, a navy blue dress with delicate embroidery, but it represented far more than personal achievement. It was the symbol of her reconnection with a legacy she had almost lost forever. "I still can't believe you nailed those French knots on your first try," said Eleanor, appearing silently as she always did. At 79, she had become the Institute's artistic director, a role she fulfilled with the wisdom of someone who had dedicated her life to preserving textile art. Victoria smiled, gently touching the glass. "I had an exceptional teacher, and maybe a little help from genetic memory." The Institute had become an international phenomenon within months. Artists from around the world sent in their creations to be preserved and displayed. More important, young women came daily to learn ancient technique, take part in workshops, and discover their creative voices in a space that celebrated authenticity over commercialization. Sarah Chen arrived this morning, Eleanor reported, referring to a 23-year-old designer who had become one of the first fellows in the Institute's mentorship program. She finished the tapestry she was working on in honor of her grand. "Victoria, you have to see it. It's breath." They walked together to the main studio, a bright, open space that took up the entire second floor. Dozens of women of all ages hard at work, some using traditional loom, others on modern sewing machines, all united by a shared passion for textile art. Sarah stood at the center of the room, putting the final touches on a tapestry that depicted her family's journey from China to the United States. The details were extraordinary. Gold-threaded ships sailed across seas of blue silk. Hopeful faces gazed toward a promised horizon in soft shades of pink and orange. "Sarah," Victoria said, approaching the young artist, "this is magnificent." The young woman looked up, eyes shining with pride and gratitude. "Mrs. Blackstone, I never could have created this without the program. My grandmother used to tell me these stories, but I didn't know how to honor them until I learned the old techniques here." Victoria felt a familiar wave of emotion. Stories like Sarah's played out daily at the Institute, women rediscovering their roots, finding ways to express their experiences through art, building bridges between generations that had once felt lost. "Eleanor," Victoria said as they watched Sarah work, "do you remember what my mother wrote about dreaming of a museum?" "I do," Eleanor replied softly, "but I think she'd be surprised to see you've built something far greater than a museum. You've created a home." The word home echoed in Victoria's mind. All her life, she'd associated it with the luxurious apartment on the Upper East Side, with its expensive furniture and spectacular view. But now, surrounded by soft conversations, the hum of sewing machines, the scent of fresh fabric, and the lavender perfume Eleanor always wore, Victoria finally understood what the word truly meant. "There's something I need to show you," she said, leading Eleanor up to her new office on the third floor. The space was nothing like the corporate office above. Smaller, cozy, its walls covered with photos of the Institute's artists and shelves full of books on textile art history. Victoria opened a special drawer in her desk and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This came this morning. It's from James Harrison." Eleanor frowned. Harrison had been formally charged as an accomplice to Charles Blackstone's crimes and was awaiting trial. He had lost not only his position at the company, but also his reputation and most of his personal fortune. "He's writing from prison?" Eleanor asked. "No, he made bail, but he's under house arrest," Victoria explained, carefully opening the envelope. "Eleanor, he's asking to see you." The letter was brief, handwritten in a shaky script that betrayed deep anxiety. "Victoria, I know I have no right to ask anything after all I've done, but there's something about your mother, about Margaret, that you need to know. Something not even Eleanor is aware of. If you can find it in your heart to offer an old, regretful man a little compassion, please come see me. I promise this will be the last thing I ever ask." James Harris, Victoria and Eleanor exchanged a long glance. After months of painful revelations, the thought of more secrets was both intriguing and terrifying. "Do you want to go?" Eleanor asked. Victoria walked to the window, watching the city stir below. "Part of me wants to ignore it completely, but another part. Eleanor, what if he really does know something important about my mother? Then let's find out," Eleanor said with quiet resolve. Together, 2 hours later, they stood at Harrison's apartment door on the Upper West Side. The man who answered looked like a ghost of the powerful executive Victoria had once known. He had aged years in mud, his hair now fully white, his face lined with deep regret. "Victoria, Eleanor," he rapped. "Thank you for coming." The apartment reflected his fall. Luxury furnishings sold off, leaving only the basics. But what caught Victoria's eye was the table at the center of the room, covered with documents, old photograph and what looked like a diary. "Please sit," Harrison said, motioning to the plain chairs around the table. "What I have to show you will change everything you think you know about Margaret." Victoria felt Eleanor tense beside her. "James, if this is some kind of—" "It's not a trick," Harrison cut in. "It's a confession, one I should have made 30 years ago." He picked up the diary, trembling hand. "This belonged to Margaret, but it's not the journal," Eleanor knew. "It's another one she kept hidden, even from her best friend." Eleanor leaned forward, eyes locked on the diary. "That's impossible. Margaret told me everything." "Not everything," Harrison said gently. "She didn't tell you about the plan we were working on in the final months of her life." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Victoria felt the world tilt again. "What plan?" she managed to ask. Harrison opened the diary to a specific page, revealing Margaret's familiar handwriting. Margaret wasn't just documenting Charles's crime. She was planning to expose them publicly. "And I was helping." Victoria and Eleanor read the pages in silence. They detailed press conference preparation, a list of trusted journalists, strategies to protect Victoria from the fallout. "You were working with my mother against my father?" Victoria asked. "Done. I loved Margaret," Harrison confessed, tears streaming down his face. "Not romantic. She was completely devoted to you and her art, but I respected her. And when I saw how Charles treated, how he stole, I couldn't stay complicit." Right. Eleanor picked up the diary, turning its pages with care. "James, if this is true, why didn't you go through with the plan after she died?" "Because Charles found out," Harrison said, his voice cracking. "The night before Margaret died, he discovered our plan. He threatened, said if I spoke out, he'd destroy me. And I was too much of a coward to risk." Victoria stood suddenly and walked to the window. Everything shifted again. Harrison wasn't just a collaborator. He had been her mother's ally, silenced by fear. "There's more," Harrison said, pulling a photograph from the pile. It showed Margaret, baby Victoria, and Harrison smiling at a pic. "Margaret asked me to be your godfather, Victoria. She wanted me to look after you if anything happened to her." Victoria turned to him, tears falling freely. "Then why didn't you? Why did you let me grow up knowing nothing about her?" "Because Charles convinced me it was better for you not to carry the weight of the past," Harrison said. "He told me you'd have a better life, more stable, if you never knew the truth. And I believed him." Eleanor stood and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "James, you made terrible mistakes, but the fact that you're telling us this now, it means something." Victoria looked at the man who'd been both enemy and hidden ally, feeling a complex mix of anger, sorrow, and, unexpectedly, compassion. "James," she said finally, "you can't undo the past, but you can help build the future." He looked up, hope breaking through his tears. "How?" "By telling your story," Victoria said. "At the Institute, helping others understand that it's never too late to do the right thing." Nay, in that moment, surrounded by painful but liberating truth, Victoria finally understood that the home she had built through the Institute wasn't just about preserving the past. It was a place where forgiveness and redemption take root, where imperfect people could still find ways to honor those they had lost. If you believe that forgiveness can transform even the most wounded hearts, leave a like and stay with us on this journey of healing. Eleanor, Victoria, and Harrison spent the rest of the afternoon reading Margaret's hidden journal, uncovering layer after layer of a woman even more courageous and visionary than they had ever imagined. And when they left that apartment, they were no longer the same people who had walked in. They had become an unlikely family, bound not just by Margaret's memory, but by a shared resolve to bring her vision of a more just, creative world to life. 2 years after the discovery of the secret collection, Victoria stood center stage at Lincoln Center in New York, facing an audience of over 2,000. The event marked the official launch of the Margaret Whitman Foundation for the Preservation of Women's Art, a movement that had grown far beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. Eleanor sat in the front row, wearing a navy blue dress she had designed herself for the occasion. At 81, she had become an internationally respected figure, giving lectures at universities and museums about the importance of preserving women's artistic tradition. Beside her sat James Harrison, who had become one of the Foundation's strongest advocates after serving his sentence under house arrest. 3 years ago, Victoria began, her voice echoing through the silent auditorium. "I was the CEO of a company built on lies. Today, I'm the guardian of a legacy that represents centuries of authentic female creativity. This transformation didn't happen because I was brave. It happened because an elderly seamstress had the courage to show me who I really was." The audience applauded, but Victoria gently raised her hand, signaling that she wasn't finished. "My mother, Margaret Whitman, died when I was only 3 years old. But through Eleanor's calloused hand, through yellowing sewing, through every stitch I learned to make. She kept teaching. Today, I don't just want to share a story of discovery. I want to issue a call to action. She gestured toward the giant screen behind, where images of this collection began to appear. Century-old tap dresses that looked like they'd stepped out of a fairy tale. Embroidery that told the stories of women whose names had been erased from history. These aren't just historical art, Victoria continued, her voice thick with emotion. They are acts of resistance. Every stitch represents a woman who refused to be silent. Every design is a declaration that women's creativity cannot be bought, sold, or stolen, only honored. In the audience, Victoria saw the faces of women of all ages, many with tears in their eyes. There were young artists who had benefited from the foundation's grant, business leaders who had changed their company practice after learning Margaret's story, and activists working to protect creators' rights around the world. But this isn't just a story about the past, Victoria, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. It's about the future we can build together. In the past 2 years, the Margaret Whitman Foundation has identified and compensated over 1,100 artists whose creations were taken without credit. We've established 47 artistic preservation centers in 23 countries. Most importantly, we've created a global network of women committed to protecting each other. Victoria paused, looking directly at Eleanor. There's something I learned from my teacher, my mentor, my second mother. Eleanor taught me that every stitch we sew is a prayer. Every line we draw is a bridge between who we've been, who we're becoming. The screen behind her shifted, showing images of the Institute in action. Women of all ages worked side by side. Young girls learning ancient techniques from elder masters. Contemporary artists collaborating with guardians of centuries-old tradition. The Institute for the Preservation of Female Creativity isn't just a museum or a school, Victoria explained. It's a home, a place where women can discover that their voices matter, their creations have value, that their stories deserve to be told. She turned back to the audience, her voice now soft, more intimate. How many of you have ever felt your creativity wasn't valued? How many have had your ideas taken by others? How many were told not to pursue your artistic dreams because it doesn't pay, or it's not practical? Hands went up all across the room, a sea of shared experience that instantly bonded strangers together. Well, I'm here to tell you, you are not alone, Victoria continued, her voice rising again. Today, the Margaret Whitman Foundation is launching the Global Mentorship Program, connecting young creators with experienced mentors around the world. We're establishing a $50 million microloan fund for women artists, and we're launching a digital platform where any woman can register her work and protect her copyright completely free. The applause was thunderous, but Victoria wasn't done. She motioned for Eleanor to join her on stage. The elderly seamstress rose slowly, walking with the grace of a queen. This extraordinary woman, Victoria said, placing her arm around Eleanor's shoulder, kept my mother's secrets for more than 30 years. She risked her own safety to protect a truth that could have died with her. Eleanor, do you want to say something? Eleanor stepped to the mic. Her voice was soft but clear, echoing across the room. Girl, young women, artists of all ages, you are the keepers of the future. Every line you draw, every color every story you tell through your art, it all matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. She paused, looking directly into the camera, broadcasting the event to millions around the world. Margaret used to say that a piece of art never dies. It simply waits for the right person to continue its story. You are those people. You are the continuation of the story. Tears streamed down Victoria's cheeks. There's one last thing I'd like to share with, she said, pulling a small object from her pocket. It was Margaret's emerald ring, the one Victoria had worn every day since Eleanor gave it to her. This ring belonged to my mother. She wore it while creating her most beautiful works. Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Margaret Ring, an annual honor given to one young artist who will receive not just financial support, but personal mentoring and the chance to have her work permanently preserved in the Foundation's collection. She turned to Ellen, and I want the first recipient of this honor to be the woman who made it all possible. Eleanor Whit, yes, she adopted my mother's maiden name as a tribute. Will you accept the honor of being the first bearer of the Margaret Ring? Eleanor covered her face, overwhelmed with emotion. When she finally found her voice, it trembled. It would be the greatest honor of my life. Victoria slipped the ring onto Eleanor's finger, and in that moment, something magical happened. The entire audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted over 5 minutes. It wasn't just applause, it was recognition, gratitude, virtue and a celebration of a legacy that had finally found its voice. When the applause faded, Victoria approached the microphone one final time. Before we close, I have a personal invitation for each of you. Visit our Insta, bring your daughter, your granddaughter, your friend, learn a new technique, share your own story. Because art isn't just about creating beauty, it's about creating connection. She looked into the camera, and for those of you watching from home, know that you are part of this family too. Every like, every comment, every story you share helps us grow. You are part of this quiet revolution that is changing how the world values women's creativity. The event ended with Eleanor and Victoria holding hands on stage, surrounded by hundreds of women who came up to join them. It was a powerful image, generations of women united by a common purpose, celebrating not just what they had already achieved, but what they would go on to accomplish together. Later that evening, Victoria and Eleanor sat in the little studio where everything had started. The space was now officially part of the but they still came back whenever they needed a moment of quiet reflection. Eleanor, Victoria said, working on a simple embroidery project that had become her favorite form of meditation. Do you think my mother would be proud? Eleanor smiled, her eyes glistening with joyful tears. My dear, Margaret wouldn't just be proud, she'd be in awe. You didn't just honor her memory, you created a legacy could never have dreamed of. Victoria nodded, feeling a deep that had become her steady companion in recent months. You know what's most incredible? Finally understand what it means to be truly rich. And what does it mean? Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. It means having the power to turn pain into beauty, injustice into opportunity, silence into voice. Victoria, making a perfect stick. It means using what you have to lift others up, not to rise above them. They worked in comfortable silence late into the night. Two women from different generations, united by a purpose, transcended every difference between them. And when they finally said goodnight, both knew that the work they had started together would continue for generations to come. Victoria and Eleanor's story had become more than a personal journey of discovery. It had become a global move, changing lives one stitch at a time. Thank you for joining us on this emotion. This story of courage, discovery, and transformation reminds us that love and truth will always find a way. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our inspiring stories. Tell us in the comments which part of this story moved you the most, and what kind of story would you like to see next. See you next time, and remember, every person carries an extraordinary story waiting to be discovered.